So before I introduce the next speaker, I do want to share a couple of points that I heard out of here. We heard that it's critical to get ahead of tax time, that we have to turn it right side up, that we have to remember the broader policy conversation, and that we have to expand mobility through the tax code. The other thing I want to share is a data point. We all know about the demographic changes that are happening in the United States, but here is one other data point that arose as we heard about grandparents. 50% of all the human beings who've ever lived to the age 75 since the beginning of human history are alive today. That's one of those great facts I don't get to cite often, but as we think about who do we also bring along, my mother is calling her congressman every day, and she's 85 and lives in Florida. So there you go. So with that, it is my great pleasure to introduce Lisa Donner, who is the Executive Director of Americans for Financial Reform. This is a coalition of more than 200 national, state, and local groups that have been working tirelessly to reform the financial industry. They have led the groups on the ground to strengthen and pass Dodd-Frank and help create the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Since the passage of Dodd-Frank, Americans for Financial Reform has defended the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau from continual attacks and has pushed for ongoing effective consumer protection rules. Prior to joining AFR, Lisa was the executive director of the Half and 10 campaign and the co-director of the Center for Working Families. And before that, and this may prove to be some of the most important skill sets, she was a community organizer. And I started my career in the same way. So with that, please welcome Lisa Donner.
All right. Well, thanks very much to all of you for being here and to CFED for the opportunity to be part of the event today, and also really for the chance we've gotten over the last years to work with them, both nationally and with partners in the field in fighting payday lending. It's really been great to get to do that. So this is a well-timed event, just as on so many of the issues where I only heard the last part of the first panel, but just as on so many of the issues that folks there were talking about, this is a perilous time, and lots of the progress that we've begun to make on making consumer finance markets fairer and safer, and the financial system as a whole safer, is enormously threatened. So it's a very good time to be talking about all this. To sort of step back to the very big picture, the financial crisis reminded us in an incredibly powerful and a terrible way just how important the rules of the financial system are and how much impact they have. Or the rules or the absence of fair rules can impact our whole country's economic security as well as the security of individuals and families. Millions of people lost their jobs. Millions of people lost their homes. People lost billions of dollars in retirement savings. Our whole economy lost trillions with a T of dollars in output. The crisis and the Great Recession hurt everyone, but people of color lost the most, with African American households losing 55% of their wealth and Latino households 66% of their wealth. And the recovery has been slow and difficult for most people, although not for most of the Wall Street banks who were at the center of the crisis. And gaps in income and wealth between the very wealthiest and everyone else have only grown larger, as has the racial wealth gap. Of course, the absence of adequate rules is not only a problem when it crashes the global economy, it's also a problem day in and day out, and contributes to those same inequalities. Payday and car title loans cost something like $8 billion a year in excess fees, tens of billions of dollars a year from overdraft, often exactly the same hard-pressed families and their neighbors. Loans associated with rip-off for-profit schools probably cost something like $36 billion a year, again, to hard-pressed families. That's a lot of money. It's real money being grabbed every day and every week and every year out of the communities that we care about by big banks and financial companies, leaving them less resourced and more vulnerable. And it's often real money being grabbed by schemes that have the people who can least afford it pay the most, so that the poor are paying more for the same services. And there are costs beyond the dollars, as you all know from your work with families and communities. In a recent report, the CFPB put out 1 in 4 families, or one in four people with a debt in collection reported being harassed or threatened by a debt collector. And when you talk to people about that, that's not just a phone call, it's sleepless nights, it's stress on a marriage, it's stress on people's relationships with their children, it's fear of losing your job. So the dollar costs are high, and the human costs are enormous as well, and reverberate into other parts of people's lives. So the good news in the face of all of that is that in response to the crisis, Congress created a new agency, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, with, for the first time, the sole mission of focusing on making financial markets fairer and safer for consumers. Around working on credit cards, on mortgages, on short-term loans, on debt collection, on student loans, on credit reporting, the whole range of issues in people's financial lives. In the relatively short time it's been around so far, the Bureau is doing exactly what it was set up to do. Almost $12 billion in relief to consumers ripped off by banks. That's a lot of money back in people's pockets. 29 million people who have gotten some kind of relief from the Consumer Bureau. That's a substantial segment of the population. More than 1 million complaints to their complaint system, which is open and searchable, and which you can use to find out in advance some things about different companies, as well as a resource for complaining and often getting a response. Their enforcement actions beyond the dollars have really worked to transform the whole markets around them, and they've included taking on Navient, a giant student loan servicer, for misleading people about repayment plans in ways that have people paying much more than they need to be for their student loans, a huge cost. And also, it turns out, failing to inform service members, misinforming the credit bureaus about the status of loans to seriously disabled service members, impacting the rest of their lives. The kinds of things we really want and need a tough agency with a public service mission taking on and doing something about. So, what's happening now? Precisely because the CFPB has done a good job. It is under enormous attack by the financial firms, big and small, who are being made to follow the law and being made to give money back when they violate it. And they are trying both to prevent the enforcement actions, like the ones I just talked about, from continuing, and to block a series of upcoming rules that the Bureau is in the midst of working on that will be the next important steps in making financial markets safer and fair. An important rule against abuses in payday and car title lending. An important rule against forced arbitration clauses that essentially are a get-out-of-jail-free ripoff pass for big banks when they break the law. Great. And so the efforts to attack the Bureau will include, and actually just today, it's hard, Lauren will talk about this later, but just today we heard that a Congressional Review Act resolution of disapproval has been filed against the Bureau's prepaid card rule, a modest and reasonable rule that says a prepaid card should really be prepaid and not include, for example, high-cost overdraft fees. Even that apparently needs to be overturned. So people are trying to attack the Bureau by threatening its director. His term runs through the summer of 2018, but they would like to get rid of him sooner, which would, in an effort to really cripple the Bureau's work, and also by proposing structural changes that would undermine the Bureau's independence and effectiveness. And so before I turn to introducing Congresswoman Moore, I'm going to leave you with the thought that it will be really important for all of us to work together to make sure that those attacks don't succeed, and that efforts to cripple the Bureau. However, they're disguised because it's so popular, nobody is going to admit that they're going to get rid of it. And it is indeed popular across party lines, popular with Democrats, popular with Republicans, popular with independents, popular with Trump voters. So they'll propose things that sound like little changes, but are actually designed to keep it from doing its job. All right. It is my pleasure now to introduce Congresswoman Moore, who was elected to represent Wisconsin's 4th Congressional District in 2004, and who's a member of the House Committee on Financial Services, and is the ranking member on the Financial Services Committee's Monetary Policy and Trade Subcommittee, and also serves on the Housing and Insurance Subcommittee. The Congresswoman has been a strong advocate for improving the economic and employment conditions in low-income communities. She's fought to curb predatory lending in minority neighborhoods, pushed for more affordable housing, and stood up for compliance with rules which require fair, non-discriminatory hiring of minority-owned businesses for government contracts. She's also been a leader on women's issues, leading the charge to reauthorize the Violence Against Women's Act, and a fighter for initiatives that put low-income students on the path to educational success. In addition to her distinguished career in elected office, it seems particularly relevant to today's conversation to note that as a VISTA volunteer recently out of college, Representative Moore was a leader on the ground in asset building work and spearheaded the founding of a local community credit union in reaction to interest rate redlining against African American and low-income borrowers. Our conveners today at CFED work with the Congresswoman's office here in Washington, but also work closely with a number of organizations in Milwaukee. As my earlier remarks suggested, in today's circumstances, we even more than ever need powerful and effective leadership in standing up for consumers and communities, on the ground and in Congress. We very much appreciate Congresswoman Moore joining with her CBC colleagues earlier this year in putting together a strong letter supporting the CFPB and making it clear just how outrageous it would be to attempt to remove Director Cordray from his post before the end of his term. There will be a lot of misleading and downright hypocritical excuses given for attacking consumer protection, including using the phrase community bank as a shield for deregulatory policies that are giveaways to bigger banks and dangerous to the public, or the phrase capital formation as an excuse for similar moves. So we really look forward to working closely together with the Congresswoman to elevate the arguments that we need more, not less rigorous consumer protection, more, not less enforcement against discrimination, more, not less demanding fair play and accountability from big banks, along with a real focus on making lending work better for communities and homeowners and for small and very small businesses, rather than using that as an excuse for deregulation. Thank you very much, Congresswoman.
Wow, I almost gave my remarks at the back of the room, since that's where the power center is. Seems like everybody wants to sit in the back. But I want to thank you for that really lovely introduction, and for the invitation to be here today. Feel so honored to be here. I know that you heard from Senator Brown earlier. He is a knowledgeable, compassionate leader in the Senate, someone who I served with at the House, and I can tell you, you know, there's going to be a struggle here for the next 4 years, 2 years, however long it is, but I can tell you, folks like Senator Brown, they're going to know they're in a fight over there. So I've been seeking some inspiration since Wednesday, November 9th, 2016. And certainly this invitation here is one of the highlights since that time, because I get a chance to really talk to people who are on the ground, because the outside game is more important than it has ever been. There's only so much that I can do, Senator Brown can do from our vantage point. But what really seems to work and seems to move Congress and move the White House is the outside game. And so we're going to have to keep that going. I'll be 66 years old today. I don't see anybody around here with that's my age, but trust me, it's going to have to be just like the 60s. Every day was protest day. Being here with you all who do this work, you try to find solutions to lift people from poverty, really, really, truly gives me the renewal of energy in the age of Trump. It took me a few days to get out of bed, but I'm up now. And I don't pretend to know exactly what it means, but I do know that GOP control of combined government with the Supreme Court, with the president now encouraging Senator McConnell to do the nuclear option and to approve his Supreme Court nominees with only 51 votes, means that poor people, people who are at the bottom, are going to suffer, and they're going to fall further behind if they're successful at pushing their agenda. I want you to know that poverty alleviation and empowering those with the least financial means is a subject that I'm very passionate about. And I know a whole lot about it because I have been poor. I learned the hard way. And part of that hard education on poverty came at the hands of Republican Governor Tommy Thompson. The former governor of Wisconsin ended welfare as we know it while I was in the state Senate. And of course, that became the model, not only for the national welfare program instituted by Newt Gingrich and President Clinton and that Congress, but we even had international visitors come over to study the Wisconsin model. And that has been exacerbating poverty ever since. You know, and everybody I claims victory because the poor are now invisible because we don't have aid to families with dependent children, and the rolls have declined. And so they've claimed victory because we have pushed the poor underground. But if you've read the book, $2 a Day, how many of you have read it? Everybody in the room, you know that at any given moment, there are 3 million children who are living in households where they earn $2 or less a day, which is, according to the World Bank, the definition of people living in extreme poverty right here in the USA. You know, poverty is a tough subject because it's not just those people who were formerly reliant upon AFDC. Poverty has many tentacles. It's persistent. It doesn't adhere to rules. And it even has the audacity to conflict with strict caveat emptor Ayn Rand's dystopian theory. Wow, gasp. Sometimes poverty alleviation even requires government to intervene. And so, as a result of this, the GOP has stopped thinking about poverty and is instead, because it's so hard to solve, my good friend, Speaker Paul Ryan, talks about the trillions of dollars that we've spent and billions since the war on poverty started. So since we haven't ended poverty, the solution is to do a couple of things. One, to blame poverty on poor people. You're poor, it's your fault. And two, as I indicated before, to just make it invisible. You know how they do when they have somebody important come into town. They take all the homeless people and sweep them quickly, put them somewhere for a day so that they'll be invisible. That's what we have done to the poor with ending AFDC and making TANF this time limited program. Look at Speaker Ryan's poverty plan that he put out last year. I applaud him for even raising the issue, but other than some sloppy academia, he fell into the very same trap, which is to find one program that works, and that's largely consistent with his tax cut only philosophy. Somehow we're going to fix poverty by giving rich people a tax cut. Okay. But ignore all the other drivers of poverty. He then goes on to denounce the U.S. safety net as someone having a hammock. And come to think of it, that's a pretty good analogy. Think the safety net is like Swiss cheese. It's full of holes. But like a hammock, it leaves you wobbly and in an unstable condition and not very practical in the real world. Look, we all support the earned income tax credit. And at this point, I don't think that there's any debate that it has not been effective. But poverty begins long before anybody files for the EITC. It begins in childhood. It begins with empty bellies that makes learning more difficult. It begins when a human being is not even old enough to have a paper route or to be the person at the beauty shop that earns the extra money because they're cleaning the bowls out, the shampoo bowl out. It begins in subpar, underfunded schools, made worse by voucher programs that exacerbate funding problems for the poorest and the neediest. It continues with harsher punishments for so-called troublemakers, normally Black and brown children. It continues on the streets where poor kids get pulled over at age 12 and 13, harassed, and get criminal records at 13 years old. I call this the school to prison pipeline. It continues with the inability to get a job, either the lack of access or predatory access to banking and financial products, where folks are being taken advantage of by subprime lenders, by payday loans, by loans they can't afford, by investment advisors that take advantage of what little 401k savings people can put together. Poverty happens to real people, to not just dummies or irresponsible or lazy people, but smart people. Not bad people, but good people. Poverty happens to people who are doing well, but they get sick. And sickness wipes out their savings. Sickness can plunge you into poverty. We want to empower people, give them an advocate that gives them some leverage. And Dodd-Frank, which I worked on, did a lot of stuff. We did a lot of stuff. We tweaked capital and lending standards. We created cross-border rules and resolution facilities. And I'm not devaluing these things. But what we did for people is more immediate than what we did to sustain and protect the capital markets. We created the CFPB, which has done a marvelous job of stopping financial fraud and schemes. We've returned billions of dollars to people through the effort and the work of the CFPB. Now, the people we helped were not the hedge fund class. The CFPB went after auto lenders for discrimination and credit cards for scamming regular folks. One of the things we learned, that if your name was Jermaine Jones, Jermaine Johnson, or Lakeisha Smith, or Enrique Gonzalez, your car loan was going to cost more than Leah Flazinski's car was going to cost. And the CFPB discovered that and went after them for that blatant discrimination. We created a housing trust fund to help build capacity for low-income housing. Anyone who has read the fantastic book, Evicted, how many people have read Evicted? I tell you, I'm talking to some smart people. What y'all need me for? You know, what we learned, what did we learn in that book? One of the things we learned is that it is almost impossible to gain your footing when market rents, when the housing for the poor is deteriorated as it is, it's like 90% of market rent. And how can you have any stability with schooling or health or keeping a job, you know, when paying rent is such a crisis? In Milwaukee, in Wisconsin, we have the highest rate of incarceration among African American men in the country. And in Milwaukee, men are locked up. And in Milwaukee, women are locked out by evictions because of an abrupt loss of income, which leads to these evictions and homelessness. And these are not just irresponsible, lazy welfare queens. These are families with babies, with children. Government policy has a role in breaking this generational chain. Some of it's aid, but some of it is to stop the impulse to make poverty the fault of the poor and punishing the victims or just trying to make them invisible, one way or the other. Look, we see these proposals to drug test welfare or unemployment recipients. This is the favorite new theme of Republicans. You know, they not only want to make assistance meager, unavailable, hard to get, but they want to make it humiliating and paternalistic. Meanwhile, all these fine upper middle class and wealthy folks are taking mortgage deductions, capital gains deductions, at the expense of taxpayers, and that's just fine. You know, I introduced a bill to drug test rich people. I'm telling you, I said, hey, I'm trying to save those people on Wall Street from cocaine addiction. And I say, hey, if you're taking itemized deductions of $150,000 or more, then we need we need a sample. Make sure that you're gonna be okay. Now, I'm not holding my breath to get a hearing on it. But I wanted, you know, if we're gonna have a conversation about, you know, invading people's privacy in order to get government aid, I figured we may as well start at the top so we can get some real money. Because you're gonna, you know, you don't have to pee in the cup. You could just take the standard deduction and we'll just claw back that $150,000 or more that you're claiming in itemized deduction. But you know, I've got more serious legislation where we are gonna have a hearing during this cycle. And I've introduced it ever since I've been here. It's called the Rise Out of Poverty Act. And it is reauthorizing to improve and secure an exit out of poverty. And that is exactly what millions of Americans struggling in poverty need, a way out. A way out with durable tools like education and training and support. You know, the rhetoric of welfare reform, I see that 1 minute sign. I'm good. The rhetoric of welfare reform, I mean, if they would live up to the promises of helping people escape poverty, this is what welfare recipients want. They are just like everybody else. They want to work. They want to give their kids, a birthday cake on their birthday without people staring into the cart, begrudging them that because they paid for it with food stamps. One of the provisions in my bill is that you can have financial aid awarded to you for educational purposes. My own story, inspired this particular provision. That you cannot count tuition and book assistance and deem that as income so as to deny people an opportunity to escape from poverty. You know, right now, about 87% of Americans believe that you need some post-secondary education in order to survive in our current economy. And that is no different for welfare recipients. My bill explicitly states that the purpose of TANF ought to be to eliminate poverty among children and families, not to have these dollars siphoned away to plug state budget deficits. Right now, the way the TANF program is constructed, I've got communities in my district that use it to do infrastructure improvements for business to come in. They use the TANF dollars for that. It would guarantee child care. I got half a minute left. It would guarantee child care to persons who participate in work programs. It would guarantee up to 24 months after recipients leave the rolls that they would have some support to keep them from slipping back into poverty. It would also demand that states adopt standards to address domestic and sexual violence and not make it just arbitrary or voluntary. It would demand that they do that. And last but not least, RISE ought to recognize the counter-cyclical nature of our capitalistic economy and not have these rigid 5-year term limits, no matter if we're in recession, depression. This program ought to work the same way that food stamps work. I believe that my legislation is comprehensive, that it will empower people, it will help them be lifted from poverty, create opportunities and incentives that are useful and successful. Here's what I think about this. We need to give low-income people a real opportunity and a ladder, and they'll take it and they'll climb. They'll climb and they'll rise. Thank you so very much.